listening to Pop This, the podcast where three women talk about pop culture. Here are your hosts, Lisa Christiansen, Andrea Gin, and Andrea Warner.
All right, so does this happen to you every year when we're having this season change from like winter, spring? Is that all of a sudden like everyone goes, oh, you know, it's going to be a good day tomorrow. And I'm like, miss the rain. I'm suddenly all like, and when we turned the clocks, it's like really light now. And now I'm really craving to be back in that cave again.
No, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
I don't know.
We've had like a week of spring. You can't say that yet.
I mean,
it just stopped. It just rained like yesterday. Come on.
Yeah, but like
you're just the person who's never satisfied. That's just
is that what it is? Because I was just all of a sudden remembering, as if there was like a little montage of my season, like coming home and being all cozy with my blanket and, you know, and it's all dark but maybe I'm...
No, you're only allowed to do that in Vancouver when it's like July or August, when it's like crazy hot and you're just like dying for like cooler weather.
But now it feels like it the way the season's changing, because we still get a little bit cool and rainy now. I'm looking at the season going and like I'm almost waving at it and I'm like, no, no, don't go yet. I'm not finished with those evenings that like I always love to have ramen in the rain, like I'm in Blade Runner. Like that's one of my favorite things.
That's in Blade Runner?
Oh yeah.
He's like
lots
eating
of
noodles all the time. Lots of noodles. Yeah.
Noodles in
like
the rain.
I think noodles in those little stands. He's sitting outside. I gather it's not very cold.
Oh.
Yeah, so every time I eat noodles, I'm always like, it needs to rain.
I see what you're saying. So he eats at ramen stand. Does it take place in Japan?
No, it's in LA, but a future LA that is
that serves ramen everywhere.
Also, like, yeah, in a kind of, I don't know, post-racial future. Maybe not quite that, but it's very Asian LA.
Yes, and perhaps also whatever environmental fears came to play, but it's the opposite. It's just rain, constant, right? It's like it's never sun. Except for at the very, very end, it's never sunny in Blade Runner, is it?
That's a good point. Why is it raining so much in Los Angeles?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like their thoughts in the 80s on environmental degradation had something to do with lots of rain.
Well, if you lived in LA in the 80s, what could be the worst case scenario? Rain.
Right?
For your 1980s tan?
Yeah, and also, I mean, again, I'm not fondly thinking about this, but does anyone remember a little thing called acid rain? Remember we used to be afraid of acid rain and killer bees?
Heard about that
we'd never talk about acid rain anymore. I haven't heard it at all. I mean, the only thing I hear people afraid of is acid wash jeans coming back, but never acid rain.
I remember being in LA and it raining and seeing people actually running to get out of the rain. Like, even though it was just, regular rain, it's like people trying to cover their heads and running for cover kind of situation. Like, people in LA do not like rain.
No, I was in LA once and I went to a party and it was raining. And so we went to this party and then the host was like, well, thanks everyone for coming out. And I went, is there something going why? What happened? And he's like, well, the rain. I went, yeah?
Yeah, it's quite strange.
Yeah, but we're talking about LA and rain like the rest of Canada talks about Vancouver and snow, right?
Yeah, that's fair. No, it's absolutely. If it even hints of snow, I'm like, sorry, I can't go out. I mean, I could die out there. But anyway, you're right.
But
I'll probably start fantasizing about really warm sunshine soon. But right now, I'm just kind of, I can see that the old Lisa in the rearview mirror, and she was cozy.
Wait, you're saying you made it through the entire winter without longing for sunshine in summer?
I think I did. Yeah, I think I...
Wow.
I know. But, speaking of 80s and 90s, do you remember the Blind Melon No Rain song?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole concept of that song is about how this woman hated when it was sunny out because then everyone expected you to do things. But in the rain, you get a pass, right? Like nobody has expectations of you.
I feel like that's totally the opposite in Vancouver. I feel like if it's sunny, you don't expect anyone to really come over or do anything because they're out enjoying the sunshine and doing stuff. But if it's raining, then people are expected to show up to stuff, like do regular life because it's raining.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I know. When I see, like, I'm not a hiker. But when I see like pictures of people on hikes and when it gets sunny here, it looks like Boxing Day in a mall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never done the grouse grind even once.
No, me either.
But I've heard that on a nice day, it's like wall to wall people going up the grouse grind. Like, I just don't even, I can't even imagine. Like, there's that many people. That's Vancouver. Like, they just, as soon as you get nice weather, people just are outside.
Well, I did have a thought of going to Lighthouse Park, which is very beautiful, right, in West Van. But I thought to myself, it was a beautiful day, and I thought if I don't go right at like 8 a.m., it's no point. Yeah. I'll never get a spot in the parking lot, right? And then it'll just be completely, like, I'll want to go to the end and sit on one of those big rocks, and it'll just be clamoring full of people, right? Like, and how is that being in the great outdoors? Like, what is the point of that?
Yeah.
That's why I stay in.
Well, and I'm not a camper, but you hear all these things about how like camping spots are like completely booked for the entire summer, like the second they become available, and it's so competitive and everything. Like, yeah, we just live in a place where people love the outdoors.
Yeah, and that camping thing, hey? I mean, I can sort of understand if you're in the middle of nowhere, but to have it like you can see your neighbor, like, you know.
Yeah.
Your creepy neighbors and their screaming children and like pots of wieners. It just sounds awful.
And sleeping, I'm too old to sleep on the ground. Period.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we went for a walk this weekend at Derby Reach, and that campground was full. And it was just this Easter weekend, and there were no empty spots. The campground there was full. And that's like
where's Derby? Where is that?
It's sort of Langley, between Langley and Fort Langley.
Oh, okay.
On the Fraser.
People were camping there?
Yeah. Yeah, the campsite was full.
Oh, that's so they drove for like 45 minutes and then pulled in, and
I guess maybe not even 45 minutes, maybe just 15 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty park, but it's not far from a very urban space. Yeah.
Yeah.
You look over the river and you see condos.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what is that? That's insane.
Yeah.
Look over the river and see condos. Oh my gosh.
Or you could see like hotels that you could go and stay at instead of camping.
I mean, I will say that if somebody said, here's my deluxe, all done up Airstream, you know, like really beautiful, I could maybe then imagine driving that and parking it somewhere outside, like on a river or something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
How about a nice $2 a night auto camp?
Hey, segue.
Good job, Joe. Good job.
Yeah. All right, well, you are listening to Pop This, and I'm Lisa Christiansen.
I'm Andrea Gin.
And I'm Joe Clark.
And full disclosure, before we go any further, I have to say that Joe is my husband. This is Andrea Gin, and Joe is my husband. And he's on the podcast today because of his film expertise.
Not because of nepotism?
Not because of nepotism.
I screened it. Maybe. It's true. You do have some knowledge, so we're all good. Yeah.
But we should also say we are missing Andrea Warner on this podcast. We've been off for a few weeks, taking our own little spring break, but she's dealing with some medical things, and so she's off this week as well. However, we also want to mention that she is ramping up to release her book. And it's called The Time of My Life, and it's about Dirty Dancing. And she will be on the podcast to talk about that book in the near future. But for now, we would just like to acknowledge and celebrate the fact that she is releasing a book. In the time that I pretty much did nothing but sit on my couch and watch TV, she wrote and is publishing an entire book.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know how she's doing this, but
I mean, we're a team on this podcast, but we're all very, very different personalities. I mean, you won't hear my book coming out anytime soon. Not even a pamphlet. So just
no, I know. I'm proud of myself if I've read 2 books in the time she's written 2 books.
I know.
Yeah, mine take about 10 years. So.
Okay, so there's oh man, you wrecked the equation. Now you've got a book, right?
But but literally 10 years between them. So.
But let's point out something that Andrea Warner and her husband do not own a dog, and we both, all of us are dog owners, and to do that successfully takes a lot of time.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I know, Lisa. I mean, you've raised children and you're raising dogs. Is it the same?
It's very similar.
Yeah.
Not a cat. A cat there's that, here's your food, here's a litter box, see you in a day, right? Mm-hmm. Dogs and kids are similar that way. You can't just, put them in a room with a bowl and hope for the best.
Lisa, do you want to read the bio for Joe?
I would love to. Joseph Clark is a lecturer in film studies at Simon Fraser University. His research and teaching interests focus on archival and non-theatrical media, including newsreels, home movies, and sponsored film. He is the author of News Parade, The American Newsreel, and The World as Spectacle. Welcome, Joe.
Well, thank you very much.
Formally.
Yeah, so which made him the perfect guest for us to do It Happened One Night, which was made in 1934. So you could sort of put into context what we saw. And I guess, we should also say that we've been wanting to watch this movie for a long time because it's considered kind of the first rom-com. It kind of set all of these tropes that we still see in rom-coms today. I was watching it and I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly like this movie. This is exactly what happens in this movie. And it's amazing that, that movie lives in the DNA of movies, every rom-com ever made after that.
It's shocking, actually. I mean, I knew and yeah, I'm glad that we watched it, and I know we've been talking about it, and boy, when you say the DNA, I mean, nothing has changed. I mean, nothing at all. It is quite shocking. So what is it? It's 90 years old? Is that right? Am I getting the math right?
Yeah, 90 years old.
90 years old. So that is just, I mean, how is it possible that we've learned nothing more about the rom-com at all? I mean...
Or just the ideas of romance and the ideas of comedy haven't changed that much.
Yeah, or that a formula was devised that is kind of ingenious enough that it can be rearranged in a million ways or not rearranged and made totally formulaic. But you can see when there's a fresh spin on it, you can see that. I mean, I feel like you guys mentioned this film. Whenever you're talking about a rom-com, this film comes up as a kind of reference point. And it seemed to me, well, I mean, then we should watch it together. And this is a film that I teach. I often include in my kind of intro to the history of cinema before 1950 as a good example of lots of things, of early sound movies, it's a good way to talk about genre because of the things we've already been talking about, but also a good way of talking about gender in the 1930s or the way film Hollywood studio system worked and all kinds of things. It's a good example film for a intro film class. So I thought we could talk about it.
Yeah, and what kind of surprised me too was that, I mean, obviously I know that Clark Gable was a great star and and considered one of the foremost leading men ever. But what really surprised me is how little that idea has changed as well in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I mean, he really could have played it now. Exactly the same way.
Exactly. You're watching it and you're like, I sort of see like Brad Pitt, does the same kind of thing in his movies. George Clooney.
Matthew McConaughey is who I was thinking of.
Matthew McConaughey,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, so let me just read the background to this movie. It Happened One Night is a 1934 American pre-code romantic comedy film with elements of screwball comedy, directed and co-produced by Frank Capra. The screenplay by Robert Riskin is based on the August 1933 short story Night Bus. Classified as a pre-code production, the film is among the last romantic comedies created before the Motion Picture Association began rigidly enforcing the 1930 Motion Picture Production Code in July 1934. It Happened One Night was released just 4 months prior to that enforcement. It is seen as one of the greatest films ever made. It is the first of only 3 films, along with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Silence of the Lambs, to win all 5 major Academy Awards. In 1993, it was selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Yeah.
Okay, Lisa, do you want to read the plot synopsis?
Sure. An heiress, played by Claudette Colbert, flees from her overprotective father, who is attempting to prevent her from formalizing marriage to a man he considers a gold digger. She meets a reporter, Clark Gable, who has just been fired by his newspaper. He makes a deal to take her to her new husband in return for the story. In the course of their journey, they fall in love. A misunderstanding separates them temporarily, but finally love triumphs, and that's from Obscure Hollywood.
And so that is the blueprint basically for every other rom-com ever made. Ever.
Yeah. I do think people just probably sit with that synopsis like a Mad Lib and just put in different professions, different people, and it all works out. But I have to say a reporter has really stuck. Or they're like a magazine journalist or something. That's pretty popular in rom-com world.
Well, it makes sense in this context as well. There was the reporter became a kind of stock character in the 1930s because they were a good kind of reporters, journalists of all kinds move between classes. So they can circulate amongst the rich classes and kind of speak that language, but they are kind of salt of the earth, working class characters. So they're useful plot devices, especially in the context of a film like this, where you have a kind of class, class difference becomes such an important part of the story.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but he definitely, it also just, there's also that side of the reporter job that's always the lovable rogue too, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That he's got the rough edges, but, a good heart and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, could you tell us a little bit about what pre-code Hollywood means and just put that in context? Because it seems like an important aspect of this movie.
Yeah, because, this film is really important because it kind of comes on the cusp of what they call the code era and the end of the pre-code era. So the pre-code era is basically this period after sound takes over. And during that period, there is a lot of kind of what risque material, either sexually risque, much more sexually explicit than we often expect from historical films. So this is the sort of period 1929 to roughly 1934. You get depictions of prostitution. You have gangsters, films like Scarface, where the gangsters are actually the heroes as well. So relatively positive representations of criminals and crime, and relatively permissive films in relation to sex and sexuality. And as a result, a kind of permissiveness for especially women have a lot more freedom during this period, women characters to express their sexuality, for example, and, the power that comes along with that. But even while that period is going on, Hollywood is getting criticized, and Hollywood is taking steps to kind of avoid that criticism. And, it's kind of artificial to say that there's like this really black line between pre-code and the Hays Code, which is what it's called. William Hays was the commissioner of the Motion Picture Production Code. What is it? The Association of Moving Picture Producers and Distributors. He oversees that kind of trade organization. And he writes this code in 1930 as a way to sort of say, look, we've got these standards. So it was a way of avoiding censorship from the government, because the government was kind of worried about this material that was coming up in Hollywood. But they wrote the code and hoped that that would be enough. All the while. So the code exists and it's not really being followed. And so eventually it's no longer doing its job. The Catholic Church starts saying, we're going to start rating films for content. And that's when the code starts to be enforced much more rigorously to really limit what Hollywood films look like. And that's to basically say, you don't need to rate our films, you don't need to censor our films, we'll do it ourselves. So roughly in 1934, that's when the code becomes much more rigidly enforced. But a film like this one technically comes before that decision, but it does all of the things that then in the period of the Hays Code, of the production code, the films in the late 30s, for example, take the lessons of It Happened One Night, which is you can have a film that is kind of about sex, is kind of about an extramarital affair, but you can do it in a way that it keeps anything explicit off screen and uses euphemisms and jokes about things, and you can still make an adult film without offending anybody. It is kind of model for the code era.
It's interesting because it's obviously absolutely 100% misleading that people were living the same way that the Hays Code was suggesting, movies, right? So I feel like our impression of what, people were doing in the 30s and the 40s is very clouded by these sorts of things, because that's all we have is reference points, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we have books
deceptive.
and things, but yeah, everyone was planning to do the same thing. They just couldn't do it. How long did the code last?
Well, I mean, it lasts well into the 40s, but by then, like, the war changes things, and so film noir comes along and kind of reintroduces those kinds of more sexually explicit, or risque and criminal elements. So really, by the 1940s, those kinds of things, it's no longer being enforced. It's really this period of the 30s and early 40s when it's really at its height. But
Yeah, we're still. I mean, it's interesting because they made it, like you say, under the wire to be the template for rom-coms.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also a good way of pointing out that, like, the code, people want to, say, before and after, pre-code, post-code, but this film is technically pre-code, but it is much more like the films that come after, in part because it kind of, it does all those things. It manages to titillate in a way that is entirely innocent. And really, that's what, some people say that some of the greatest films of Hollywood were made under the code because it was a way of, it forced filmmakers to be creative about the ways they represented things, and sort of use humor or, plot devices and so on to sort of work within the bounds of what could be said. And in some ways, It Happened One Night is is kind of a good example of that, where it's kind of somehow made better for its artificial prudeness or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, aside from that, it was a really fascinating film because it kind of set in the era of the Depression and just gave you a real kind of feel of what people obviously the stuff we talked about was a little deceptive, but in terms of the sense of humor, the pop culture references, songs that they were singing in the film, and sort of the jokes that they were making, I never have really thought about that watching a movie before. Is this Yeah, like these things like all made people laugh because it was just like in the collective consciousness and in the pop culture of the time. Like where they're all singing the same song on the bus. And I forget what it was. It like there's
The
a
daring
part where
young man on the flying trapeze.
Yeah,
That was-
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That must have been like a hit of the time or something. Like it's so interesting to think of it while you're watching it as well. Like the pop culture impact of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was a box office hit too, right? So people were, yeah.
But a bit of a weird one where it, because in the period, pictures like this one with big stars would start out in big, downtown movie theaters. And it didn't have much success in those ones. Then, like, once it's played in all the downtown theaters, it goes out into the second run theaters or into small town theaters, and that's where it made its money. So it was a bit of a surprise. It sort of initially, the reviewers didn't think that much of it, and the sort of downtown elites didn't think that much of it. But once it went out, it became a kind of people's favorite and big box office success. So sort of kind of subverted some expectations in that respect. And that's, in that respect, it kind of made Frank Capra's reputation and anticipates some of his other movies, which have that kind of popular camaraderie of the working people kind of theme running through them, right? And so you might want to link those things to some extent.
It was made during the Depression. And the only time I really got a sense of that was at that one cabin they stayed in where everyone was lining up for the showers.
Well, there's
that campsite there.
Yeah, but there's also the mother and son on the bus. The mother faints from essentially starvation, and Claudette Colbert gives the kid her last pennies, essentially, and Clark Gable has to admonish her for being too generous and giving away their money. But that woman is on her way to New York to take a job. And even though they had to spend the money that they needed for food on the bus ticket, they still needed to go get the job. So that's it. In some ways, it's actually quite like frank about the circumstances of the Depression, considering its otherwise kind of airy and, like lighthearted treatment of everything else. There's these moments where the reality of the economic realities of the moment kind of peek through. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a movie you watch and you're just like continuously shocked. Like, what is it about human nature where people are so engaged with a man and a woman that hate each other or seemingly do? And then, fall in love. Like, why does that story play well over and over and over again in every decade since this movie was made? Like, it's almost literally every rom-com.
Yeah, and that's what made me start to feel a little bit queasy, actually, because I started thinking it's one thing for a movie from 1934 to present this gender imbalance where the man knows everything and the woman's like, save me, but we're still doing that. I mean, that's a little depressing.
You just think of I was thinking about Roman Holiday, even not a recent movie, and how, that's about
another princess and a journalist.
Themes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That I always wonder about that, and I sometimes ask my students about this. And that's like when there's that meet cute at the beginning on the bus, and basically she's in his seat, and we as modern viewers recognize that as a meet cute, and recognize that even though they hate each other now, we already know. Like, I think because we've seen this movie 100 million times. Every rom-com is like, so we know exactly how it's going to end. We don't know what the journey's going to be like, the literal journey in this case, but the journey, what that's going to look like. But we know the end. And I try and get, I ask my students, what do you think? Did 1934 audiences know that they were going to get together, or were they surprised? Did they understand? Because that was legitimately new here, and this like screwball comedy. This is the first of its kind of genre. This idea that like, you know, the difference here is not that there's some external force holding these people apart. It's just mutual hostility is what's preventing them from seeing how much they love each other. But we're so used to that as a premise. But I think maybe in 1934, the plot was legit a surprise.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about because it is such a given now. It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess you just can't write a movie with any tension in it and hold anybody's interest if the two characters don't initially start off hating each other. Like if they are just happy people who are friends, I guess it's just not an interesting story.
I think there's a little bit, I think that we like the idea too, though, that people change, and that's something I think people love about story. Like, I have to say, I don't know if this is officially considered a rom-com, but one of my very favorites is The African Queen. And I just, it makes perfect sense that these two would not get on. Like they have absolutely nothing in common except getting stuck on this boat together. That's it. They're so different. And that character, the changing of how they start talking to each other, how they start feeling about themselves, suddenly there's a mission that's bigger than them, all of that stuff. I think that to me is why I generally still fall for rom-coms. If that story exists where I see two people because it's romance, the other person has somehow allowed them to change. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find a way to not feel so crappy about myself. But
well, I can't remember who wrote this, but someone said that like the romance, it's certainly in early Hollywood, like what defined a romance from a screwball comedy or a romantic comedy was that in a romance, the woman was typically lifted up like Cinderella's story, right? Like a woman from a lowly position moved up to join her prince. But in these screwball comedies, or at least in It Happened One Night, you have this like high status rich woman who ultimately has to learn to be down to earth, has to learn to be like of the people, which also is a kind of very Capra like kind of thing. Is like the true values of the country. The true values are like the common people, even if the elites.
But we did see Clark Gable do a similar thing, right? Where he was going to take the $1,000, gave it back, and then when he went and itemized what was owed by. Right? It was only, $36 or something. And so there was a character arc move for him, right? But I don't know in what way though. Like, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, also you see him, I think it happens a little earlier than that, his change, because he takes the $1,000 so that he can like make a life for the two of them.
Yes,
it's more noble than that. But it's it's on the hay, under the hay haystacks. Like he realizes that, they actually, he could love this woman when she talks about like going to an island. Oh no, he talks about going to an island, right?
But do you think that people like teams of writers who are writing rom-coms today are just like, okay, like this is the template, and you think they literally are going like, now we need like a musical moment where some singing happens?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I do.
And they like engineer something, or like they have to create like a class divide between the two people or something, or I don't know. Like, do you think it's as engineered as that in writers' rooms, or do you think it's just all of these things are so ingrained in everybody's minds in a rom-com that it's just how things are written?
100%. I think sometimes it is this engineered. Maybe not every time. Maybe sometimes they come more, organically from, a writer's imagination. And then, then the studio says, well, how about we put a musical moment here? How about there's a twist at the end where what we think like, just when they think they're falling in love, they're pulled apart again, But I do think that, like, there is somebody at some stage in a lot of movies that is sort of like, well, we need this plot point. We need this kind of moment. We need a meet cute, What's the meet cute?
Yeah, I know. And I mean, you can't blow up the 3-act structure. You can't blow up that we need certain beats. I think the one problem, to your point, that irritates me about the rom-com is the final misunderstanding. There's all that part really, because sometimes they're so ridiculous. This one makes sense. I mean, she was engaged to, she's practically married to someone else, so it makes sense.
She is married. She just decides not to annul it.
Yeah, exactly. She's married to someone else, so it makes sense. That's not a misunderstanding. That's literally, literally quite an obstacle. So that makes sense. But sometimes, like, the obstacle thing is just so horrible, and that's when I think you're right, when you can feel the paint by numbers ish to it.
Yeah. I mean, this one does have the groom flying in on a, whatchamacallit?
Auto gyro.
Yeah, wow.
To get to the wedding, which was a nice touch. Because, first of all, like, was that a real contraption that rich people flew around on? I guess so,
I guess so, yeah.
I've never even heard of that word before or seen it, but it was like a primitive helicopter.
Yeah, like a one-person helicopter. Yeah.
But I have to say, the part that blew my mind the most from this being 1934 and the continuing tradition is the running out on the wedding.
Yeah.
That one, I mean, that was so funny.
I guess that never gets tired.
I don't know why. I always feel like, what a waste. Did they go and eat the food? Like, what happens? Like,
yeah.
Well, that felt like a real Julia Roberts kind of moment. But there's also a scene, I think, in maybe it's Runaway Bride, when again there's like basically a car chase involved in one of those Julia Roberts films. Anyway, there's a car chase, and this one also has a kind of car chase moment, which is tied into the misunderstanding, which I think is still a really effective kind of moment, a cinematic moment where they're driving in opposite directions and he's racing to get to her and she thinks he's not coming, so she leaves. It's classic rom-com moment.
The other thing that was interesting, you made note of in the note or in the script here, is that the father makes a change to being the villain to being the hero.
Yeah.
By the end of the movie. Just like, please, I'll do anything. Just don't, this guy is an idiot. And oh my God, why is his name King? Is that what it's like? It's such a bizarre, like they keep saying King. And anyway, that's beside the point. But
I guess that was an American rich person's name.
But he's not rich, right?
30s.
Well, King? He is as well. Yeah. They're both rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I thought the father was worried that he was only marrying her for the money, but
I think the money doesn't. But he comes in on the auto gyro, so he's rich.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But one of the also like classic rom-com moments is the like dress moment. There's always like a fashion moment.
Yes.
And when like she's revealed in that like wedding dress with the flowers around it, I was like, oh, that's quite nice. Like just exactly how I've seen in every other rom-com, the makeover, or not, in her case, it wasn't a makeover, but like this big fashion reveal that has become also like a thing.
Yeah. One of the moments though that did not, I guess in that expression, age well, which was pretty creepy, I think, is when those detectives come into that cottage that they're staying in. And they play that scenario of a married couple. Oof. That felt really terrifying, actually. Like, I felt really chilled.
Yeah, and there's that moment, but there are other moments when Clark Gable slaps Claudette Colbert. That moment, he's joking. They're playing it up. But, of course, everybody was like, the comedy of that is that they play up this basically abusive relationship, which then the onlookers, the detectives and other people are like, oh, well, they must be married because only real married people would be so abusive to would a husband be so abusive to a wife. And then subsequently he does slap her, and the father also slaps her across the face.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I mean, that maybe this is the right place to put this, which we should at some point mention that Clark Gable, was reportedly a garbage human being off screen as well as in this character. He definitely fathered a child with a co-star, with Loretta Young. And, that child he never acknowledged. She had to keep the child a secret. She was she kind of disappeared from Hollywood for 2 years, and then came back with an adopted daughter. And
Wow.
After Loretta Young died, her daughter, the daughter of also Clark Gable, said that she had had a conversation with her mother, and her mother had said yes, it wasn't a consensual sexual relationship with Clark Gable.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So, by all accounts, so this kind of abuse that we see on screen is mirrored in the real world, with Clark Gable at least. And a lot of that period of Hollywood, right? That's the other thing about the code, is that it sanitizes what's on screen, but what's happening off screen is often just as is quite dark. And the code and the studio system empowered, producers to be abusive to their starlets, routine, the casting couch. That was all born of a kind of whole system that empowered a powerful set of producers and made especially women extremely vulnerable to the studio system.
Wow, I feel bad now bringing up her weird eyebrows, but they were weird.
Well, that was a fashion of the moment.
That's a fashion.
I know, but man, oh man, that was a look, hey? Yeah. I mean, wow.
Eyebrows through the ages.
Yeah, that kind of Garbo and Jean Harlow, those yes, very architectural eyebrows.
So what about Claudette Colbert? I mean, I thought she was very good in this, obviously, and won Best Actress and things. But what was she known to? Was she a big star at the time, or? Both
Gable and Colbert are big stars at the time, but both of them are taking a bit of a chance with this. Colbert had, she was a star in the pre-code era as a kind of vixen, kind of vamp, very using her sexuality on screen, and so playing this kind of innocent, almost childlike, naive, was a departure. And then subsequently the roles, she got a lot of work. This kind of transformed her career. She went on to do a lot of kind of romantic comedies and played this kind of character. And to some extent it's true for Gable as well, because, he was, this was the first time he played this, this is the first time that people recognized this particular brand of Clark Gable. And when you think about even in Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler is basically Peter Warren but mean, a less jovial Peter Warren. There's all of the kind of patronizing and kind of roguishness. It's just not played for laughs in Gone with the Wind, but it's very similar kind of character, Rhett Butler, to this character, I think. So
it's funny that that's funny, because I always think about that movie, and it's interesting generation wise, because when I was a kid, I sat down to watch the movie with my mom, with Gone with the Wind, and she told me at the time that one of her great frustrations is that, Scarlett O'Hara had this fantastic Rhett Butler throwing himself at her, but she was always in love with that wimpy Ashley Wilkes. And and now I look back at the movie and I'm going, boy, she had some good instincts about her, right? Our Scarlett knew what she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But speaking of Clark Gable and his star turn here, is that the other, and it's probably entirely apocryphal, but a good little bit of story that goes with this film is that the studio sort of tried to plant a story that undershirts there was a drop in sales on undershirts because Clark Gable didn't wear an undershirt in this film. He just just had his shirt and removed it to show his bare chest. And that had created a precipitous drop in the sales of undershirts.
Wow. But you know what? We didn't even mention that as a trope. Why does the guy got to take his shirt off in every movie, right? Like that's almost crazy. Like how many times they always have to take their shirt off in a movie. Like that's standard.
It goes all the way back to Clark Gable.
But also used as kind of like sexual intimidation in this context. Like it's pretty sanitized, but he's taking his shirt off to get her to like agree to stay in some way, in a way that's... putting up that rope and the blankets and all that was, I mean... but can we just quickly, because I know we're running toward the end, just also bring up the ending seemed very strange to me. She just drives off and then we don't see them again. Well, we see them... I mean, behind a curtain, right?
They're in the hotel.
Yeah, I know, but it's just so like...
Yeah, I guess it's supposed to be funny, right? Like it's...
But it's also, again, it goes to this it's almost a joke about the code. It's like, well, we can't show them actually embracing or kissing, but we all know what's going on. Even that couple, who bought them the toy trumpet and everything's a euphemism. The walls of Jericho will fall. And so it's sort of like, again, it's like they take the constraints of the code and say, okay, we're just going to make a joke of all these things that we can't do. We're going to make a joke about how we can't show you what is happening.
But even so, so the sophistication level of this audience to know all of this and to the walls of Jericho, there was a lot, it felt like.
Yeah,
like what are the walls of Jericho? Like I don't know.
It's a biblical reference, right?
It's a biblical reference, yeah. I don't know to what extent the audience were sort of understanding all of those biblical references, but
maybe they went home and looked it up or something. I don't know. Yeah.
So, okay. Do we think this movie pops? Joe?
I mean, it holds up to me. Like what I always think is that it plays so, because I play this for students all the time, and it gets laughs in the room. And I think that always surprises people, or that surprises my students, that they are laughing at a black and white movie from 1934. And they're not laughing at it. They're laughing at its jokes. The humor still, in many scenes, still works. So I'm going to say it pops. And yeah.
What do you think, Lisa?
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think it's a good enough movie on its own. I didn't find it boring or slow at any point. I think in terms of if you're like a rom-com fan, it's really fascinating research. And I think, we didn't touch too much on the woman's role and different things like that, but that seems a bit more prickly because it was a very, just a little bit odd. But anyway, I think there's lots always to chew on in this movie.
Yeah, it's I was reading up, and there was I saw a note from the the original script. Somebody had written, some script reader, editor, co-writer had written on it some changes, and then it was from there on out, it's Taming of the Shrew.
Yes,
that idea of she quote unquote needs to be tamed, and the Clark Gable character is the one that can. It's a pretty, whatever Claudette Colbert's character is at the beginning, feisty and independent. Ultimately, the film and Clark Gable, tame her in all of the ways that we wouldn't want to see in a film these days.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it pops because I think it's essential to understand the rom-com to watch this movie and understand how far back literally everything you see in a like even if we think about Rye Lane, which is like our favorite rom-com that we've seen in recent memory, has elements of this rom-com in it. And so it's like it's incredible. It's incredible. So,
it was better than I thought. I think this always happens to me with old movies, and I feel really guilty about it. Every single time I go, oh, well, that was a good movie. I don't know why it feels like I'm going to get stuck watching something horrible, but I never am. I mean, it always surprises me how little things have changed, and in better ways how things have changed. But on the whole, it's shocking how little has changed, really.
Well, my work here is done.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we like to leave our episode on things we recommend. Joe, do you want to go first as our guest?
Yeah, sure. Well, on the theme of pre-code Hollywood, I'm recommending Siren Queen by Neva. Siren Queen is a 2022 novel by Neva. She writes kind of... it's kind of like magical realism set in the real past. And Siren Queen is set in pre-code Hollywood, early 1930s Hollywood. And it's about a Chinese-American actress who sort of will do anything to make it in the movie business. But it is like a queer romance about people of color in a studio system that is not designed for either of those things. And so it's sort of the dark side of 1930s Hollywood, but all in a way that is like where, you know, all that kind of monstrosity that I was referring to of the casting couch and the power of the studios gets turned up to 11 in a kind of mystical way. Like there are spells and evil lurking in all the corners of the studio system. So it's a really amazing book, and it paints what is a kind of fantastical but also weirdly accurate picture of Hollywood in the 1930s. It's really great.
Wow, I just looked it up. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I can't wait. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay, Lisa.
Yeah. So I myself, probably like many other people, have watched the Netflix Three Body Problem. I don't know. Have either of you peeked in on it?
No, I've seen the ad for it, but I haven't watched it.
So it is a science fiction, and I guess also a speculative fiction as well. Originally a Chinese book, and when it was adapted, it was set in England. But there are scenes where it goes back to communist China because that's a big element of this story. But basically, and I knew this going in, so I'll say this: is that basically the idea is that finding out that there are some aliens on the way to Earth, but it's going to take 400 years.
Ooh.
So I can't begin.
I just got to chill just from you saying that.
Yeah. I can't tell. It's a lot of physics. There's a lot of scientists involved. And so I don't understand completely this three-body problem, which is a real issue or whatever thing in physics. But anyway, 8 parts, or like the series, all of them are up. And I really enjoyed it. I know it's back and forth. There's lots of different complaints about it. But I watched the whole thing and thought it was quite compelling. So it of course leaves on a cliffhanger. So I am hoping for a second season.
Nice. I can always rely on you on being like the first in to watch buzzy things and and then to tell us whether it's worth watching or not.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way because I did watch also the Truman Capote, The Fox.
Oh,
Do you know that one?
I'm excited about watching that.
That's all I'll say.
Okay.
There's my review. Okay.
Well, I'm going to recommend something that I'm pretty sure you recommended it a while ago, but a new season is out of Girls 5 Eva. And I just love this series. It's so funny. And like continuously a little stunned in how little attention it gets in the in general, for it being like so funny. Like it's like Tina Fey is the executive producer of the show, and it's got really funny people in it, and Sarah Bareilles is one of the characters in it, and it's about a girl group who it was like a one-hit wonder, I guess in the early 2000s or something like that, and then it has a chance to reform because their songs being sampled by a rapper. But yeah, if you're a fan of 30 Rock, you'll like, this is just as hilarious. So
rapper Little Stinker.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Lil Stinker.
I always really like seeing Paula Pell as well, because weirdly, I feel like if you're a person that's watched comedy in the last 20, 30 years, you've been watching something from Paula Pell, but you just didn't know because you don't often look up writing credits.
Yeah.
So, like she was on Saturday Night Live for years. She's done lots with, Tina Fey and all of them. So I just love seeing her too.
But she is such a great performer as well. I mean, I've only seen her in a couple of things other than Girls 5 Eva, but in Girls 5 Eva, she is, I don't know, she to me, she's the standout like comic performer.
I agree,
Yeah.
No, she's amazing.
An incredible series. Everybody should watch it. So thank you, Joe,
Thank you, Joe. That was very enlightening. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Telling us about this movie.
Wow, I really appreciate it. I feel a lot smarter. I'm probably going to have to go and tell people all this stuff and sound like I knew it before, because unfortunately I'll do that. Yeah. I won't credit you.
Tell the Clark Gable undershirt story. That's the best part of it.
Yeah.
And if people want to look you up, they can find you at Joe Gin Clark on Instagram, or they can find your book about newsreels.
Yeah, I have a website, josephclark.me. There's details for buying my book. If you want to read about newsreels, which is like the news business that Clark Gable is in. He was a newsreel cameraman in another film a couple of years after this. He started with Myrna Loy. Yeah, called, now I can't think what it's called. But anyway, another Clark Gable vehicle.
As an aside, I wanted to ask you quickly, did I get this right? Was there a newsreel made by Stanley Kubrick?
Well, there's a theory that he shot the moon landing, right? The conspiracy theory is that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing, and so that's why,
okay.
So, yeah. So it was, and technically newsreels were still around when the moon landing happened. 1967 was the last. Yeah, maybe not. Anyway, but it's still referred to them as newsreels.
Big thanks to you, Joe, and to Andrea, who will be producing and co-hosting. And, where did you find this guest? I mean, thank you.
And if you want to reach out to us, you can send us an email at popthiscollective@gmail.com or find us on the socials. But yeah, we are missing Andrea Warner and hope she will be back very soon. And yeah, we're back in the swing of things. So we'll be back with a new episode next week as well.
All right. Okay. See you then. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.